In Matthew 15, Jesus tells us how people were breaking God's commands for the sake of their traditions. Honor your father and your mother, God had commanded, and yet the people were disobeying by claiming that instead of using their time and resources to help their parents, they would give it as an offering to God. Thus Jesus said they defied God's law to follow the cultural norm. This is what many people in our culture do today. The Webster 1828 dictionary defines honor as a testimony of esteem, any expression of respect or of high esteem by words or actions. If we do not give due attention to our parents' physical, emotional, and spiritual well-being in the latter years of their lives, then we're not truly honoring them. In this film, we'll meet a handful of people who have gone against the cultural norm and have chosen to take the journey of caring for the elderly and infirm in their lives. Each one has done it in their own way, but they've all done one thing in common. They truly desire to honor the people they've chosen to care for, and they've each experienced the blessings that come with following God's standard for this journey of honor.
We could go a lot of places in the scriptures, but I'd just like to keep it simple with this passage in 1 Timothy. Let me read some of that for you. First of all, in chapter 5, verses 3 through 4 of 1 Timothy, it says this: Honor widows who are widows indeed. But if any widow has children or grandchildren, let them first learn to practice piety in regard to their own family and to make some return to their parents. For this is acceptable in the sight of God. And then down in verse 8 he says this: But if anyone does not provide for his own, especially for those of his household, he has denied the faith and is worse than an unbeliever. Let me make a few observations just on that passage. Now, of course, it speaks to widows, and we want to broaden that a little bit. I don't think it's illegitimate to, if you had both parents who were in real need. So let's just broaden it a little bit to both the parents. And I think the first thing that the passage says, which is really clear, is that care for the aged and needy parents falls upon the family. That's real clear from the passage, I believe. The second thing I think it says is that this type of concern for your family is fundamental to our claim of being followers of Christ. You see what it said in that passage? If anyone does not care for their own, he has denied the faith and is worse than an unbeliever. And we live in an age where the elderly are really just forgotten. They're forgotten. And it's sad to say that often amongst Christians that passages like these, like this one here, is just really ignored. Just really ignored.
Earl Merritt Sr. lives in the beautiful Texas Hill Country with his son and daughter-in-law and an apartment they built adjacent to their home.
You want to know what my thoughts are about home care against nursing home? I would prefer much home care. I think you get better care and more love for sure. I moved to Kerrville 12 years ago. I guess it started with my nose bleeding where I couldn't stop it, and I was living by myself in Waco. And I had to go at 2 o'clock in the morning to get my nose bled to stop, and it wouldn't stop. So I had to go to another hospital the next day to get it stopped, and I was talking to my son after they got it stopped finally, and I said, I'm gonna have to move, I guess, where I could be near one of my children. And he said, well, I want first choice. So when they built this beautiful home, they asked me to come live here, and it's the best choice I could have made. I'm at peace, and I'm well taken care of, and I have no problems here at all. It's wonderful living here.
My views on taking care of in-home patients, whether they be infirm or simply at a point in their life where they lose their independence and require more assistance, is ideally, I think they do better in home care for lots of reasons. Number one, obviously the caretaker has a vested interest and an emotional interest in that person, they being a relative. Second of all, they probably know more about that person than anyone else. And I think from a patient's perspective, the patient is more comfortable in his own environment, especially if it's an environment that he's been around for an extended period of time. My wife's mother, as she aged, developed a dementia, or like an Alzheimer, a forgetfulness. Initially, we tried to simply make frequent contact with her in her hometown, where she lived in her own home, but this was 80 miles away, and we found it increasingly difficult and found more and more hazard in leaving her that far away from us. So we brought her to the town we lived, and in order to try to maintain her independence, we placed her in an assisted living quarters. Unfortunately, she did not do well there. She got up in the middle of the night, she would go in other people's rooms, and it came to a point where the assisted living simply could not cope with her needs. And so we decided to move her in with us in our home. She became increasingly in need of care. She got to the point where she wouldn't eat unless we fed her. She had problems with soiling herself, not bathing unless she was bathed, and became less and less independent. From an emotional standpoint, she was extremely comfortable with us, and we were extremely comfortable taking care of her, although it was difficult on my wife to see her mother age and deteriorate medically. But we kept her for about a little over 7 years in our home, and we were extremely pleased to do that, and we felt that's what we wanted to do, and we think, and hopefully we gave her the best care that she could receive. Most patients with her condition would live approximately 4 to 5 years. She lived approximately 10 years, so her longevity statistically was much greater. We feel like that she felt very safe with us. She certainly was fed, bathed, cleansed, and protected to the best of our ability. So we think that she received the optimal care.
Of course, there are times when medical conditions require more care than a family can provide. There are alternatives, however, to simply placing these people in an institutional facility. One such alternative is Caring Senior Service.
Caring Senior Service is a business that provides care for the elderly. Primarily, the model is in the home. We are taking care of the infirm, the elderly, those that cannot take care of themselves and need additional assistance other than maybe family being there to help. Our motto is, when family can't be there, we can. So we're going in to take care of what is called activities of daily living, and that would consist of helping with bathing, meal preparation, transportation, dressing, or just something as simple as housekeeping or sitting and companionship. So we provide a wide variety of care for an individual or for a couple, whatever the case might be, when they are unable to do it for themselves. It is extremely important for a family member, if possible, if they can afford it, to stay in the home. I have seen that our clients are able to thrive more at home. They seem to improve if they have an infirmity quicker at home. Part of the reason that I got into this business was because of a family member. My mom passed away about 5 years ago, and so if I had been in this business then, I would have been able to provide her with the care, and she would have been able to stay in her home. She was living in a facility, and fortunately was in my sister's home at the time, and she passed away. It's even more than just family in the business that I'm in. I feel like this is a ministry more so than even a business, and I've felt that from the very beginning, that we are actually ministering to the clients that we take care of, ministering to their families. So I believe it's very much in line with Scripture with regard to placing others before yourselves, importance of taking care of those, and showing God's love. You know, even if we're not necessarily even speaking God's word to them, we're showing them God's love through our hands, through our actions, and I believe those sort of things can draw people unto the Lord.
One service that helps families provide care for loved ones with a terminal illness is hospice care.
My name is Cassie Alex, and I'm the director of Peterson Hospice in Kerrville, Texas. And hospice care is a type of holistic care that is given for terminally ill patients at the end of their life. Hospice care has been around since the 1800s. Hospice actually means a place of rest, or a place of respite for someone that's on a difficult journey. And so that's exactly what we do. We care for people that are terminally ill, make sure that the symptoms and the pain and all of that is under control. We're dealing with grief issues, anticipatory grief. We're dealing with family issues. And so hospice care is a whole bag of, there's chaplain services, there's nursing services, there's aides that come in and care for the patient and bathe them in their home. There's social worker services. So it's a whole, you're looking at all the aspects of a patient, not just their illness like you would in a hospital. So we're looking at all aspects of a patient. So that's what hospice care is. It's just a concept of care where actually people can be cared for wherever they would like. I think, to me, at the end of life, family is the hugest part. Just like at the beginning of life, when there's a birth, family's involved, and that's just such a moving experience for a family. But death, it's quite different. There's a joyous, and this is sad for family that's left behind. But I think that they go through all the sadness, the happy, the denial, all the things that they go through. I think that it's so important that families walk through that together. And I think that that's their role, is to support one another and to be that caring, loving, whatever it is that's needed at the end, that family can play that role in the terminally ill patient's life.
Family members are usually not medically inclined. It's usually somebody, a lay person, that just has a desire to honor their family member by caring for them during this time in their life. Lots of people don't have the ability to do that, but when they do have the ability to do that, hospice is, I think, a crucial service in really giving them the support that they need, having somebody at home. It's difficult to know when you're not medically inclined, why am I seeing what I'm seeing, and what do I do about it, and are all the medicines they're taking okay? And it's hard to know that stuff, and the different struggles that come up with hospice patients with food challenges or symptoms that pop up that are uncontrolled. If you don't have a medical resource, somebody that you can go to really answer those questions for you and help be your guide, you're really at a loss trying to manage things on your own at home, which can make an already very stressful situation even more stressful and overwhelming. I had a grandmother who actually lived with me as a child, and that was extremely educational, and life-forming, because it gave me the opportunity as a young girl to realize the importance, number one, of honoring our elderly and how important that is, because they can teach us so much. But number two, taking care of somebody when they need the help, when they need somebody to take care of them. Life is a circle, and it's, what goes around comes around. And at some point, we all will be at a point in our lives where we need somebody to help us out and to help care for us. And so, hospice especially, you see that come full circle, because you're really helping people at the end of their life and make that final transition. And so that really truly is an opportunity to really see people through to the end, and just be a wonderful partner in a journey that is unforgettable.
Bringing awareness to hospice, the hospice concept has been around, but I think there's so many people that really don't understand about hospice care. They feel like that if we sign someone up for hospice, that it's over, that's their death sentence, and there's not much more that can be done. And doctors typically will say, but there is a whole lot that can be done. It's just different. And so I think that would be the thing that I would want people to know, is that it's about life. It's not about death at all. It's not about the end. It's about memories and bringing family members together and doing all the things that you can bring a lot together at the very end of somebody's life that can bring purpose, and their understanding of, a life lived is so important. That's just the whole movement of hospice, and that holistic approach of, it doesn't take all this going to the hospital, in and out, the pinching, the prodding, the poking. It's just that loving to the very end and letting somebody have the choice to do what they want to do, and how they want to finish their last few days here on earth. So, yeah, and what a blessing it is, and what a blessing it can be for families. And that's what I think.
My name is Janet Dermeyer, and I'm a midwife. I've actually been a midwife for 28 years in the San Antonio area.
Janet's husband, Terry, was diagnosed with cancer in 2003. Rather than put him in a hospital or other facility, she honored his desire to remain in his home.
Terry really made the decision to stay at home. It was never really a tough decision for him. The only decisions for him that were really difficult were in treatments, because he really felt like that he was going to beat this thing, and he was going to die trying. He would go to the hospital whenever they recommended that he have a surgery of some kind, but it was never his desire to be in the hospital. He didn't like being there. He always wanted to be at home. So how did we make that decision is a difficult question to ask, because there was never ever an option. Terry didn't want to be in the hospital, and he was trying to stay out of the hospital as much as possible. My role in caring for Terry was kind of involuntary. I always wanted to take him to the doctor. He was pretty independent man, so he liked to drive himself if he could, but I still liked to be there just because I wanted to make sure I got instructions down really good, because he wasn't always real clear about what was necessary to happen. So I would take him to the hospital, I would take him to the doctors, I would try to make sure that he ate. He didn't always want to eat, so I made sure that I tried to get things that were either tasty, or we bought lots of Ensure and Boost and all of those supplements that we could try until we found one that he liked. So I had to remind him a lot to stay hydrated, nourished, and make sure that we had bandages and supplies that we needed for his care.
My neighbor was born in Germany back before World War II, and she grew up in that era. And during the war, she fled to the United States. She did not have a husband. They divorced after pretty soon after they had moved to the United States. And she hadn't had much contact with him in all those years. She did have the one daughter, but they had a very strained relationship. They would talk to each other once in a while. So she lived next door by herself, very independent, very strong-willed, a good, strong Christian. And she was just a very funny lady with a very thick accent. When we first moved into our house, and she was quick to come meet us, she loved to bake, so she had baked us some bread. And we just decided to adopt her as part of our family, and she adopted us quickly. She was there when all my last two children were born. She was there. She came over every Christmas and spent that morning with us, and every birthday we invited her over. So she was just part of our family. My neighbor found out in April of 2006 that she had cancer in her lungs, and it was stage 4. And she became very scared because she was here by herself. And her daughter lived in Michigan and didn't feel like she could be here. So I took it upon myself then to be as her daughter and to help take care of her through that transition. She went through chemo for over a year and really didn't get too sick with it. She was strong, but it came a time when she just decided she was tired of fighting it. And so she called me over, and she told me that she wanted to stop the treatments, that she was ready to go home, and for me to call her daughter. And so I did. And I did all of that out of love for her. Everything I did for her was out of love. And so then once she made the decision that she wanted to stop treatments, her daughter came down and made all the arrangements for 24-hour care and hospice care. And I was made the primary caregiver to help make decisions for her while her daughter was away. And when her daughter left, I was over at the house almost all the time. Every morning I would go over to see Gertrude and just make sure that she was eating, or what she was eating, what she wasn't. I would sit with her. For a while she was pretty mobile still and trying to do a lot of things that she shouldn't have been trying. And so I would just walk with her and talk with her like normal, like we always did. When she got bedridden, I would sit by her bed for hours, and when she'd get mail, I'd read it to her, things like that. She did have care helpers there who would help her with her hygiene and things like that. But there were times when it was difficult for them as one person, so I was there to help with that. And mainly I just tried to encourage her in the Word and sing over her and pray with her, and just always comforting her to know that she was not alone and she would never be alone. If I had not been with Gertrude during this time, I think that she would have been very depressed. And I just can't imagine that. I never have ever allowed myself to think of her being alone during this time. I guess they might have even put her in the hospital or something like that, a care center, which she would have really hated to do. She wanted to be home. So, I don't know, I can't even imagine that. There are scriptural reasons for taking care of those around you, especially widows, orphans, those who need somebody else to be there to help protect them and to care for them. They have no one else. I felt like I said, I felt like she was family, and the Lord had brought us together. There were other neighbors in my neighborhood that were having health problems as well. And I honestly wrestled with, am I spending too much time with her? Should I be helping these others at the same time? But the Lord kept reminding me that they have family. They have others around them here, and that Gertrude didn't. And I really needed to be with her.
In 2005, my mother was diagnosed with breast cancer. She'd actually had breast cancer several years before that went into remission, and in 2005 it came back in her liver. They tried various treatments, none of which really had any effect. And it became obvious after talking to her doctor that her situation was terminal, and that because of the way the disease would progress, that she would eventually need constant care. I met with my 3 sisters, and since 2 of them worked full-time and 1 had small children, it became the clear choice for my wife and I to take care of my mother here in our home. We actually have a small guest house behind our home, so that was a really good situation for Mom to still have her independence, because at first she was able to do pretty much everything on her own and just needed help with a few things. But as the disease progressed, she would eventually need help with everything. We felt really strongly that Mom should be cared for by us, by her family, and not receiving some kind of institutional care. We also didn't want her to be on her own, because if something should happen, she should fall, then have to be hospitalized for a broken bone or something. We knew that there was a good chance that any treatments they might give her might actually shorten her life, and she'd be spending her last days in a hospital instead of with people that loved her and cared for her.
It was hard to figure out how I was going to squeeze in caring for her and taking care of my family, because we still had cooking and cleaning, and everybody pitched in, all the kids pitched in. Everybody understood that what we were doing for Grandmommy was very important and very special. And so we, the older girls would do a lot of the cooking, and everybody pitched in on the cleaning, and we made it work. At first it was easier because she required less care, and as she got more care and I would have to eventually spend the night in the guest house with her, the burden on the family was heavy, but I don't think any of us ever felt like it wasn't completely 100% worth it. And the other thing that made it wonderful was that she was so understanding. She would be very grateful and very accommodating. She was very sweet, and she would always thank me, and she would always brag about me to her friends on the phone, and it made it easier for me. It made it a whole lot easier to know that, and I learned a huge lesson from that, to show gratitude to others when they are doing something for me. And the other side to that was, I think we tried really hard to let her know that she wasn't a burden, that it was really as important to us as we already were in our home to each other. She was a part of our family, and this is what we were glad to do, and we never missed a beat, and we never regretted it, and we never wished we weren't doing it, that we wanted her to know that I think that made it easier for her. And so all the way around we were grateful for each other, and I think that made the whole experience easier.
Those 6 months together were probably the time that she and I were the closest, really.
Yeah. I always tell people it will always, my whole life, I will look back on it as one of the greatest experiences that I ever had. As goes with the birth of my children, to be able to be there for her, to know that I had done what the Lord would have me do, as hard as it was. And there were some things that we had to do day in and day out that were very, very difficult. And there were days when I would feel like I couldn't do it. I would feel like I couldn't do it anymore. It was too hard. But I had friends that were very supportive, and I had Bible study groups, and we had his family and my family that were very supportive, and you could call, or they would come, and even friends that would come over and help me when it was really hard and she needed things that required more strength than I had. And of course the children were very helpful. So we did it, and I think it was one of the greatest things that in my lifetime I will have ever done.
And through all the difficulty, there was never any question. It was always clear this is what we felt Scripture was telling us to do, to take care of your own family, that there really wasn't any other decision.
After now having done it, I can see that it required so many small moments. I think when you do that, you would get you would get your medicine, and you would get your food, and you would get being cleaned. But what she needed was just little things, somebody to talk to her, somebody to cover her up, somebody to help her turn over, somebody eventually to feed her, and love. She needed love, and we knew she wasn't going to get that through anyone but her family. We decided that all together. The sisters and he and I and Kathleen decided that we would not put her in a hospital. She didn't want to be in one. We didn't want her in one. And I think that really helped us, because that wasn't an option. And I think that would be helpful in the future for me to remember that you decide what you're going to do for your family, and unless it's impossible, you do it. I really think that we all had unity of purpose. We all had the understanding that this was what God had for us right now, and if we had to miss a little school or eat a quicker meal, it was okay. That it really was something that we did together, and we carry that with us all the time. Anytime Kathleen's name comes up, or we talk about this, I think we all feel this sense that we pulled together, and we drew out each other's strengths, and we helped with each other's weaknesses. And I believe that it brought our family, even after she passed away, it brought our family closer, that we had done something amazing, and we all felt it. And it really was a blessing for every member of our family. One of the tremendous blessings that I wanted to tell about was the kind of time we got to spend together that I had never had the chance to do with her before. And I would go over every day when the medicine was done and the kids were done and dinner was in the crock pot and things were sort of settled about 4 o'clock, and we would have tea, and she would talk, and she would tell me about her life, and she would tell me about her kids, and she would share things with me, and we would talk, and she would be interested in me and what was going on with me. And it was just, she became the kind of friend that I didn't really ever know I would have in her, and I would have never had the opportunity to get to know her like that under any other circumstances. I'm very grateful to have had that with her.
The added blessing was doing this in our home, having the children be a part of it, to carry the meals over and to take her things, was to give them the practical, just right in front of them, example of what you do for your family, how you honor your parents. You tell your children, honor your father and your mother, but to be able to show them that by caring for your own parents is just an invaluable lesson.
I'd like to say that it was truly a blessing to be there for someone, especially in a time when they are preparing to die. That is such a spiritual time, and such a time when not only are you are blessing them, but you receive so much more in return, in knowing that you are there taking care of them, and the Lord is very near, very close by.
In a facility, you can't have family there 24 hours a day like you can in the home. Now, there are times that the care is needed for a family member or caregiver that just cannot handle doing the care in the home. But I think that it's just, there's something that happens when a family member cares for another family member. And it's not that in a facility families won't be there to be that support emotionally and physically and a lot, but being in a home and having that care facilitated there, I don't know, there's something rich about having the care, handled by the family and managed by the family, not just medical, clinical people, but there's something about the love that just transcends having a medical person do the care.
I think it's crucial that we do realize the importance of our elderly, and what an important task it is for families and communities alike to respect them and honor them and lift them up and care for them as much as we can. I think that's just an extension of God's love through us.
I think that's the whole teaching of Christ and Jesus, that when he came on the earth, he was the example for us. And there was nobody that cared for the sick and the infirmed better than our Lord did. And I think when we look at his example, we don't have to ask the question. We'll see it modeled in him. Whether it's orphans or widows or the sick or the poor, Jesus was the perfect example.
And like many family situations, it really teaches you what love is all about. You know, when you're beeped to come over for the fourth time of the day to remind her how to use the remote control, it could be a point of irritation, or it could be another opportunity to show your love for another person. A lot of times we say, I'll love you and I'll lay down my life for you, but I won't go upstairs and get your sweater for you. That's not love. True love is sacrifice and caring for each other.
Let's take a few thoughts about this responsibility. Okay, I want to share something with you. I think the first thing Christians need to be thinking of is this. They need to think of willingness versus ability, right? And we need to start with willingness, because so many people are just not willing to care for their parents. It's a matter of inconvenience for them. It's just sad to say, but it has come to that. So we need to say to the Lord, when you say, Lord, I want to be willing to do what you want me to do. It's very clear what you want me to do here, that I should make some return to my parents, it says, for this is acceptable to God. This is acceptable to God. It's interesting, the passage doesn't lay out all the specifics, right, of what you should and should not provide, but it does give us a hint, I believe, when it says, make some return to their parents. In other words, it's the same kind of care that we received when we were their children. Food and shelter and clothing and medical care, these kind of things. The role sort of gets reversed when they become aged and unable to care for themselves. But in this responsibility, we want to be willing, don't we? We want to be willing to care for our parents when they're in need, but we have to look at the other side, and that is ability. Ability. Let me give you an illustration. I know a lot about this subject, I think, because over 30 years ago, I was in a car wreck, and I've been in a wheelchair. I'm a paraplegic, been in a wheelchair for 37 years. That's a long time. My first stay in the hospital after my injury was for 13 months. That's a long time, and I've had a lot of long stays in the hospital. And so when I talk about willingness, I also want to talk ability. And that is, I don't believe that a family is responsible to do what they cannot do. Does that make sense? I love the care of my wife when I had my gallbladder out a couple years ago, but I didn't let her do the surgery, right? I let her feed me and take care of me when I was home. That was great. So there's two sides to this care. There's what I like to call the medical care, the things that doctors really need to be doing. And then there's the daily needs care. And I think that's where the family really comes into play, because that's real beneficial. I've had times in the hospital where I was getting great medical care, but just being neglected and needs of the daily things, and it was awful. It's just awful. And I'm not convinced that institutional care is the best, for our parents. Nobody can love them like their own children. Nobody can care for them as far as the needs of bathing and feeding and bathroom needs, just to be straightforward. All these needs that they have are things I believe we ought to be doing. I think our children can learn a lot about service and Christ-like love. Jesus said, "This is my commandment, that you love one another in the same way that I loved you." And that's why I believe the passage says that if we don't do that, we've denied the faith. We're worse than an unbeliever. Worse than an unbeliever. So when we look at these two sides of the coin, the willingness and ability, we can also look at it this: love and respect versus skill and training, right? skill and training. I would never encourage anybody to neglect medical care. You've got to do that. In fact, I think you're not caring for your parents if you don't do what is necessary for them medically. But once the medical community has done what they can do, then I think that's where the family steps in. Even if they are in the hospital or an institution that requires the medical care, the family should be there, providing for their comfort and these kind of daily needs. So we have the daily needs versus the curative medical type needs. In other words, we want to be honest before the Lord. We want to be honest before the Lord in providing for our parents by asking, what can we do and what can we not do? What can we not really do? And we got to be honest, don't we? And there's a lot we can do. We need to have a great, respectful, and a humble attitude toward the medical community. Does that make sense? We don't want to despise the medical community. We must understand that there's things they cannot do, but also we must not give to the medical community, to the government, or even to the church this responsibility of caring for our parents when they cannot care for themselves. I think it's a symptom of putting our parents into institutions is a symptom of a greedy culture. Because my gut feeling is that if you boiled it down, the vast majority, not all, but I would say a lot of people do it because they don't want their lifestyle interrupted. So all of those social and cultural issues involve values decisions. Values. What do I value? Do I value my parents, or do I value the freedom on the weekend to go, horseback riding or whatever, you might do on the weekend? It all boils down to value type decisions. I think what happens is it's like other things. You come to a point in your life and you do what everybody else is doing. You finish high school, you go to college. Your parents get old, you put them in an institution, and so a lot of people do it. I don't think maliciously. They just do it following the cultural norm. But we always, as Christians, have to ask, is the cultural norm pleasing, to God? So even if in some rare case you would have to put your parents in an institution, you're still responsible. You say you're still the responsible one to make sure they're comfortable there, to make sure they're getting good care, to make sure they're not being over-medicated. All of these issues are still yours. You can't dump them there and neglect them. You see, you're still responsible.
This responsibility should not be viewed as a burden. To care for someone at the end of their life is a blessing and a true joy. It provides a way to be there for someone and to show them how much you care. It's an opportunity to repay someone for the part they have played in your life. It all comes down to one thing: honor. Not only are you honoring them by caring for them, but it's truly an honor to bless them. In the spirit of Romans 12:10, let us be devoted to one another in brotherly love. Honor one another above yourselves.
If and when something happens where I'm infirm or incapacitated, that I would prefer to stay in the home if at all possible. There are times when medical situation determines that that's not possible, but if at all possible, to stay within my home.
I hope that if the day ever comes that I need the support of my family because of illness or even just old age, my desire is that they would just love me and just forgive me when I get old and can't remember or ask 15 times the same question.
I would rather be with my family because I'm around people that I know that care about me, love me, know about me, know my peculiarities, can tolerate me, and I think that I would receive better care in that environment.
I know by family, I would want to be cared for by them. And then I know the type of care that we give to our patients. I think that's an agency that understands their role, and not just their role, but goes above and beyond in the care that they give.
I would want to be cared for the same way I care for others, and that's just by the golden rule, you know, treat others the way that you would want to be treated. Everybody just deserves respect and love, and no matter what. So that's what I would want in return when I came to a place in my life where I needed somebody to care for me.
I like to know that my family will be there for me. And if for some reason they couldn't be, or if they were all to go even before me, that God would raise someone up who would be there as my family, that I would never have to feel like I was alone, and that I would have good care, good, true, trusting, loving care. And I hope that my children have learned from this time with my neighbor. They know how important it is and how beautiful it is, so that they know to be there for me as well.
I think we as a family have determined for ourselves what we think is the right thing. We hope we've instilled that in our children. And what I can do now is to build good relationships with them, and to be accepting of their lifestyles, accepting of the choices they make, and grateful, and make them want to be around me, make them want to care for me, exude through my countenance godliness.
From our view of Scripture, it is the family's responsibility to take care of each other. So I think I thought about how I would want to be cared for should the situation come, or when I'm elderly, and I think I would definitely want to be cared for by my children. I wouldn't feel like it was a burden on them. That seems to be the common thinking, but just another opportunity for us to show our love to each other.